Hey everyone, welcome to this week's recording of the podcast. I'm Josh, that's Al, and wow, Al, I what a week.
A week. I mean, and we were talking like we don't want to make this a we don't want to make this a aviation podcast. Um, but my God, has the aviation industry really given us a lot to work with this last week?
I'm just gonna say I feel like we tempted fate in here.
Yeah, we probably did. Um, you
Here we
know,
are
to
touting the fact it's one of the greatest and most safest forms of
man,
transportation, and then bam, not one but two major accidents slash incidents back to back in
in
about
there, and then
in a
and then
week,
and then
if
two
not
issues
almost.
and then two issues on the ground, right? So I mean, it's like wow. Needless to say, I think between the end of 2024 and we're barely out of January 2025. The aviation industry has really made me eat crow from that last podcast. Man, so I guess
Crow and humble pie.
humble pie, crow, my foot in my mouth as we speak right now.
Foot in
Um,
mouth,
you
humble pie
know,
for breakfast,
my
lunch, and
God,
dinner.
you know, it's tough. It's tough to say. I mean, there are a ton of issues impacting that industry, but um, it's tough to say. I've talked to a couple guys in the industry and said, is this just a lot of these persistent issues that have affected the industry for a couple years now, all coming to a head? Are we seeing the results of you know the pilot shortage, the staffing shortages, skilled labor shortages, a lot of contract disputes in the aviation industry over the last few years? Um, is this all now coming to a head? And what we're seeing the last few weeks manifesting is just a result of all that, or is this something else entirely? The again, I don't want to put on the tinfoil hat and say sabotage, just yet. But that you can go on any forum and see the conspiracy theories flying right now.
Well,
But
let's before we go on, let's take a moment and just recognize the fact that, in a period of, you know, 48, 72 hours, I mean, I think the most heartbreaking one is the aircraft crash and accident in DC. And
yeah,
I think,
absolutely.
we should really be extending our condolences and our, expressing the same sorrow. I know it's not the same
Yeah,
and everything like that, but as someone as like I think like we're both major aviation enthusiasts. Um, it strikes close to home, and no
yeah,
one should ever have to deal with that kind of loss. So,
absolutely. I mean,
yeah,
I mean, you and I are both on flights quite frequently, um, and that is 100% the worst nightmare you can have is you're flying. I mean, the heartbreaking stories, people texting their loved ones, "I'm about to land," right? And it hits right in the gut and right in the heart because anyone who's flown, we've been there, we've experienced that, we know that story. It's our story, right? I mean, and then to think that people were waiting at the airport to pick up their loved ones, and they're in the Potomac River, plane crash, probably 4 minutes before landing. I mean, it's just
so close.
heartbreaking. I mean, and to think, and when we really like think about it, like there may have been people who were waiting to pick up their loved ones sitting on the bridge that watched that thing happen, right? Watch
Well,
that.
and just not just that. Think about all the kids there. I mean, the
Yeah.
the junior youth skating group is there too as well.
I mean,
and I think it was one. I think is it National Junior Youth? I forgot what
Yeah,
the
yeah,
affiliation was, but so
it,
much promising students and figure skaters just abruptly their lives just gone,
it,
extinguished in a seconds, and that's
yeah. I
just so
mean,
tragic.
and then you think about the helicopter crew, just doing a routine flight to get training hours in, right? And then this happens. So now, I mean, I call this a catastrophic loss. I mean, obviously, we lost almost 70 people in a blink of an eye. Um, I mean, this is going to have major reverberations throughout the aviation industry, I think. And I mean, I think everybody across the board, business, military, um, leisure travelers, we're all reevaluating our travel plans because of this, right? I mean, there's major impacts from this event, which cannot be understated. I mean, you and I think we both reevaluated how much we're gonna fly, this year, given the spate of incidences. And so I mean, this is definitely, the worst case scenario. I think this gets up there. Um, this is pretty high on that list. You know what I mean? Uh, so it's just absolute tragic. I mean, I think we can touch on a few things on this one.
So, so let's set up the situation, based on all the facts that we have assembled, and then let's talk about maybe some of the analysis,
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
and then we can do that. So we have two flights. American Airlines, run by I think it's PSA,
Right.
the wholly owned subsidiary. Hence why American Airlines is heavily involved. It's not even a different airline. It is actually their own subsidiary that they own. Departs, I believe, Wichita,
Yep.
Kansas.
Out of Wichita, Kansas.
Yep. It's a Canadian regional jet, 700 series. Barely the flight's a year old, that route, and takes off, lands, and heading for Washington, D.C. Is on approach for runway one. Air traffic control asks it to consider accepting runway 33, which it does accept. So it makes a slight, right turn to line up just to runway 33. In that same process, the U.S. Army was running a training mission. Apparently, it's for recertification for a well-known evacuation corridor
Yep.
for continuity of government, aka maybe designated survivor operations,
Yep.
through that corridor. Uh, and at some point, some of the communications, air traffic controls asks if they see it. PAT25, the pilot says yes, they see it. Under VFR rules, they assume responsibility for the flight and keeping separation. At some point, somehow, the PAT25 crosses the 200-foot threshold for VFR traffic, crosses into 200, 300, maybe potentially 400 feet. We don't know yet because there is some discrepancy right now, if I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken, on the altitude data,
Right.
and then collides, um, and then uh, fireball visible in the night sky. You can see the collisions. You can see if you heard the air traffic control transmissions that's published in all the major YouTube videos and blogs. Usually come from a single source, which is usually Live ATC. You can see everyone realize what happened, and a major rescue effort is immediately mounted and underway. Airport enacts disaster. I think it was alert three, which was a major crash.
Yep.
There was some initial confusion. They thought it was two helicopters, but then they clarified it. I think within the first 5 minutes, to say it was aircraft and a airplane. And then yeah, this is kind of where we're at right now, basically, with black boxes recovered, and there's a lot of more questions than answers right now.
Absolutely. And there is a lot of speculation out there. And again, we always say we try to clarify as much as we can, clear up some of the noise. Um, and a lot of what we have right now still is speculation, simply because when I say we, the FFA or the FAA, excuse me, and other organizations haven't done a full analysis of the black boxes yet. So the majority of our answers will likely come from that deep dive analysis. But um,
I
so
think
a lot of what we have right now is still speculation. Given we have to have that instrument data from the black box to really get a good understanding of what happened and what was occurring in both aircrafts, right? Uh, I had the opportunity to well, before we go there, like the impact here, right? We lost the Blackhawk military helicopter, and three seasoned members of that flight crew on the Blackhawk helicopter. Um, we lost the civilian aircraft, um, and everyone bore, I think it was 60, 68, 67 or 68 passengers,
67. It
67,
was the last count. Yeah.
all all unfortunately perished in the flight. So I mean, this is almost 70 plus people killed in an instant. Uh, Very tragic, massive impacts here to 70 families that are dealing with the fallout here, and then not to mention extended family, friends, communities, all devastated by this impact. So, very tragic situation. And again, like we mentioned earlier, I mean, this situation itself is going to have impacts to the markets quite a bit when it comes to um, accepting risk, travel risk for companies. I think a lot of our risk management teams are reassessing right now. How essential is air travel at this point? So major impact across the board here, both personal, professional, and with policy as well, FAA policy and other things as we're looking into this. Um, I had, like I mentioned earlier, I had an opportunity to speak to a buddy of mine. He's a Blackhawk pilot, and a Blackhawk is the same helicopter that unfortunately was involved in this incident. And I want to get his perspective on how this could have happened, what potentially could have led to this. And three real big things came to mind that for him when he was talking to me. So I think one thing to really lay out there is that aircraft, fixed wing and rotary wing flying within the same airspace and around major airports is actually very common. This is not an uncommon thing. This happens quite a bit where helicopters have to pass through certain air corridors and share space with commercial airliners. Now, so by them just being there and this occurring where a commercial jet is flying and a helicopter is flying, and they're flying very close with close proximity with each other, this is not uncommon. The route itself was a common route. Most helicopter pilots are familiar with that route. It's not a route that was like they weren't flying a new route or things like that. So this is all this happens daily across the country. Nothing here that I could see, or and what he told me, he's the pilot. Like nothing there was out of the ordinary. And this has been done quite a bit. This flight plan's been executed quite a bit in that area. The other thing he mentioned is, military pilots tend to fly with what we call nods, or basically night vision goggles, right? So now I think what's important to understand about night vision goggles, nods, night optical devices, is that a lot of people have a conception that you can, when you have night vision goggles on, you can just see everything now at night, right? And that's not quite the case. You do lose some of your peripheral vision. So typical, I think these are probably these are dual tube, which is basically you have two monocles that go over, so the pilot can see through both eyes with the night vision. And typically they're auto adjusters, so they'll auto focus for near and far. And that's important to understand, is that your standard night vision that like a soldier is going to use doesn't necessarily autofocus. But pilots do have an upgraded version where they can get the autofocus function. But you typically only get 45 degrees of vision. So instead of your standard without night vision goggles, you'll have 180 degree of vision. You're narrowed down about 45 degree now. So I think the important distinction here is that if they were flying, and we don't know if the pilot had their nods down, if that was part of the training flight or not, but there would have been a decrease in peripheral vision, which means the pilot has to look around a lot more in the cockpit to pick up that loss of peripheral vision. And it's important to note that why that's important is because when you're flying, especially at night in a city, you're always looking for visual cues to confirm what your instruments are telling you. So you're looking at landmarks, reference points, lights, towers, to basically confirm what where you're flying, what your instruments are telling you. You can see the visual landmarks, and you're essentially confirming to yourself, yes, okay, everything on the instrument panel is what it's telling me is matching up with what I'm actually seeing in real physical space. So there is, it's been tossed around that maybe the pilot didn't do a full check while they had their night vision on, and potentially missed a cue and misgauged where they were. That's a possibility. Again, speculation. We don't know. We just don't know if they're flying under nods or not. But it's also important to understand that when you're flying with night vision, you get a lot of input coming into you because you're amplifying all the light to basically get the night vision. It doesn't actually see at night; it just amplifies ambient light. So it's very possible that even if they did do a full peripheral check for the full 180, that they could have been confused. There could have been some confusion as to what the lights were that they were referencing, and they could have potentially misjudged, right? That's very possible. Again, speculation. The other thing that he mentioned, which I thought was very interesting, is that a lot of times the air traffic controllers will tell the helicopter pilots, hey, visually confirm, and then you're going to be responsible for maintaining the separation. So if the pilot then confirms, I have view of the aircraft, I'm going to separate, I'm going to either hold speed or whatever, let them pass, or I'm going to go behind, but I have visual confirmation of there's a plane passing in front of me. The tower will yield control to that aircraft and let them just handle business and do what they need to do. So, three big factors there, which I think is important for everyone to understand the context behind that, is like when we talk about how could this have happened, I mean, there was a lot of different factors that could have led up to this. But it's not as simple as I think a lot of people are making this out to be. There's a lot of things that could have gone wrong here. And it could have been pilot error. We don't know. It could have been instrumentation malfunction. Again, we don't know. But all the information that we have up to this point is that this was routine, and everything leading up to this, with the information we know, shows that all policies and procedures were followed, from what I can tell.
Yeah. I think that there's something to keep in mind too. Number one, there's not um, one single item here that contributes to the crash. So for those of
Right.
you who are listening and thinking, oh, blame, the Blackhawk pilots. No, there is a series of concentric failures, multiple failures that allowed this to happen. But before I go down that rabbit hole and talking about at least some of the things that I observed. Let me first make a pin and stop to point out to the amount of misinformation that is floating around on social media. Um, some of these people, I'm just gonna say it right out, shame. Shame, 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 shame on you for putting out these ridiculous conspiracy theories. Um, my Instagram feed lit up like a Christmas tree with conspiracy theories about the helicopter crash and everything like that. Someone talked about, oh, there's VIPs, or fact gets named PAT, the private air transport, and everything like that. Uh, Ridiculous is my first thought. It's like, what? You have no idea what was going on there. You're not there. You have no access to the manifest. You have no access to the mission, and you want to do this for views. You want to do this for attention. Shame on you. Just pure shame. Like, really. So that out of the way. Let me just get that off my chest because that was just, it really grind my gears. Um,
And to that point, it doesn't do anything to resolve to get down to what the crux of the issue was, right? It just it just
exactly.
it just adds more noise. Um, to it doesn't get us any closer to a resolution or a conclusion of to what happened here, so we can correct the issue in the future, right? So, I mean, that's my big problem with a lot of stuff is that you're not adding any value. You're speculating on things. You're not adding any value to solve the problem, right?
Well, not just that, you're doing it for your 5 minutes of fame
Right.
and at the expense of people who lost people. Like, no, that's just wrong. Ethically, morally wrong. Um, let's talk from some observations I made. Number one, so not a pilot, but I'm mindful of this. Okay. So the night of the crash, it was Wednesday night, so it's the 29th. We know there was no moonlight because it is a new moon. Okay, so that means there's no ambient lighting. So the most of the lighting you will see there is artificial in nature. And when I mean artificial in nature, I'm talking about city lights or airplane strobe lights. So you have nothing to give you any additional warning that something's moving there, other than what's on your instruments, what's on your aircraft instruments.
And
Um,
and under night vision, you really need a lot of ambient light to to get those things working the way you need them to work. So essentially, like a moonlight would silhouette the plane, right? You get the reflection off the frame, and it'd be very obvious that there's something there. With a new moon, what makes it difficult with the night vision specifically is like you're relying on whatever ambient light is around, right? So if you're runways are not that well illuminated. You have the small lights that allow the pilot to kind of see where to go, but the dead space, like the tarmac and stuff, not well illuminated. So if they were flying over that, there would have been less ambient light to allow for visual recognition if they were flying under notch, right?
yeah, and keep in mind they're also based on all available publicly available information. Granted, it is crowdsourced. It is not to the accuracy or degree of what would be everyone else would have, in the professional world, who does this for a living. Um, it was showing the Blackhawk was over the Potomac, which is pitch black. So there's really even
Right.
no ambient lighting at that point to help with that. But anyways, some initial thoughts, and this is where I would say it is not one cause. Each of these items is not to fault. It is process questions that made me pause and say, wow, you know, what happened if just one of these factors actually just changed? Would we have actually the same outcome? So, for example, military was talking, I believe, on UHF
Right.
bands,
Yep.
and then so they were literally talking on one set of frequencies to the tower. Um, the American Airlines was talking on VHF, which is another radio set of frequencies. All they can hear is what the air traffic controller was talking about, basically.
Right.
But they don't have any bilateral communications between both of them.
Correct.
So that was interesting factor number one. Interesting factor number two. I'm a little bit surprised um, at the communication from air traffic controller. So number one, for example, a little bit concerned about the fact that I think it was a he, asked PAT25 if he could spot the regional jet. The problem is, at least I found, was you have no frame of reference from like a 180 direction from where you're traveling and where you're going and distance. So there was no at least way to tell in this 180 space, this is where the aircraft is going to be and how
Right.
far away.
There's usually a directional, command there, like, do you see,
Such
planes?
as such as an aircraft at such and
Yeah.
such feet and such miles.
Right. Coming
At
in
least
this
something
direction or
like that.
something. Yeah, and that wasn't there. Sorry, go ahead, man. I'm
Third thing I'm just very curious about, you know, what if especially at night, the willingness to accept visual flight at that point, flight separation at that point in the night, allowing the Blackhawk to assume responsibility under a new moon, or even if it was a full moon, I would question why would you allow anyone to have VFR, because so many times it's just so easy to get disoriented
right.
in darkness. For those of you who actually want to who can try it, I don't say not everyone has the ability to do so, but if you have a dark room or something like that where you have no ambient lighting whatsoever, um, like a bathroom perchance, turn off all the lights, turn on the shower, stand there for 15 minutes against a wall, and then try to grab or reach for your shampoo bottle that you always know where it exactly is.
Yeah.
Like, good luck trying to get it because you think it's a certain distance and where it is, and it's not there. You have no depth perception. You have no perception at all. So that one was a little confusing on my part. The other one that was also equally confusing for me too um, was the unclear instructions too as well, like pass behind. Pass behind in what direction of the CRJ? Like,
Right.
is it
Is it
left?
incoming? Is it outgoing? You don't know what direction it's coming in, right? So how do you
Yeah,
pass behind, right?
and also there was a bit of an assumption too as well. And one of the assumption pieces was uh, some of the aviation forums I'm a member of was talking about, oh, the air traffic controller gave very specific instructions. One of the instructions being, hey, that CRJ is passing over the bridge right now, and it's passing over the bridge at the certain feet, getting ready to land at this point in an area. I'm reminded about the fact that just because you are based somewhere doesn't necessarily, or you're flying a mission out from a certain area, doesn't mean that you're also technically from that area. So when someone tells you that a certain bridge by name or anything like that, it may be a very local reference
Right.
that may not be there. I'm thinking about it all the time. I think you've probably experienced this too. I'm not military, but I occasionally get shipped out to travel for training. But military, my understanding is you go all over the place for training, depending
Yeah.
on what the mission and everything is. So
Absolutely.
for all we know, this pilot, and I'm not saying they are or are not, I'm just saying this pilot may or may not have been a local and may not have understood the reference potentially too. So like, all these little small little things that just made me go, hmm, like assumption was made here, assumption was made there, assumptions made here. And the joke here, and I pardon my French on this one, but the word assumption or assume means if it goes wrong, it makes an ass out of you and me.
Yeah. Well, not to mention there's multiple bridges in that area, right? So I mean, there's that as well, right? So I think what I see here, the initial reports, something really struck in my mind. Routine flight, routine helicopter flight, common practice of helicopters flying in this air corridor with commercial traffic coming in. Um, Everything was routine, and unfortunately, when everything is routine, the complacency does set in, right? Um, and uh, speculation again, but I have a feeling that there just might have been some complacency at play here. This was a routine helicopter flight. We've flown this route multiple times. Um, the air traffic controller likely like, okay, well, we have Blackhawks flying this route all the time. They get it. These guys are seasoned pilots. They know what they need to do. Um, the commercial liner coming in. It's Reagan National, for example. I mean, there's a very common route in and out of that place, right? So this is not like an airport. There are other airports that are a little bit more complicated where you have to switch different runways based on wind patterns, on how you're going to approach and how you're going to land. Reagan doesn't necessarily deal with that as much as some of these other airports. So I think to your point of assumptions, I think there was just a lot of assumptions, which fortunately complacency kicks in when it's just routine, right? And I think maybe that led to this disaster.
Yeah, and also, but I forgot. Usually there's a bilateral communication between saying, "Hey, do you see it or do you see it?" There's usually
Correct.
both. So,
Confirmation. I see
yeah.
it. I have it. Right.
Well, no, not just that. It's both planes see each other. And one thing I just realized, and I realized earlier, but I forgot to bring it up as part of the really early piece. PAT25 was asked, "Can you see the RJ?" But the RJ was never asked, "Do you
Right.
see PAT25?" And that would have been at least some fun communication back and forth because that one small stuff. Hey, I don't see it. Okay, you don't see it. Let's go around. Just be safe.
Yeah.
But there was an assumption. Oh, you can see it by virtue of maybe communications, or they forgot to do it. Whatever. The fact is, it wasn't done. That's what's factually. Why it wasn't done, that's a whole question that I think will leave for the investigators to figure out. But,
Right.
all these small little things that just makes me kind of go, all these small checks potentially could have averted this accident. Again, not just one thing. It's all these small little things adding together.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you know we will we have to wait and see from the black box recordings if we can hopefully get some more understanding of what was happening with both aircrafts. I mean, we don't know. Maybe potentially there could have been a malfunction in the Blackhawk that we just don't know about, right? Which maybe they were unable to slow the aircraft, or that it happens, right? Unfortunately, I mean, airframes are still machines and they're still subject to malfunctions.
Yeah.
Um,
It's built by human beings. It is subject to human beings being flawed individuals. And
yeah,
as flawed individuals, you can make like God, one of these conspiracy theorists that ground my gear says, "You really expect me to believe that Pat-25 crashed in a plane? This is a military aircraft with all these very freaking, amazing technologies we spend billions of dollars on." I'm like, you're still forgetting the human factor in building the aircraft, maintaining aircraft, and flying the freaking aircraft.
and I can tell you that. I mean, well, I'll give you another analogy. Like every time we do a software patch, right, onto any common system that we use, there's usually an issue somewhere that we find out about later, right?
Yep.
Well, you know, Blackhawks have computers on them too. They got to get software patches. They got to get upgraded. So there's it's very likely potentially that could have been an issue. We don't know, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but
Or
there's
Ferg forgot they forgot to set the altimeter when they took off too. Something as small as that could
I
change
mean,
things.
there's lots of things that could have gone wrong here. I think, unfortunately, people in general, I think people want to be able to explain away how something like this happens. And when you don't have information, you fill in the blanks with whatever your brain can fathom as to the root cause issue, right? But like we've seen in multiple different aviation disasters, is it's concentric failures. It's multiple things are going wrong at once, which causes stuff. It's not, there's no like, I'll use a term here. There's no silver bullet thing that was the root cause. It tends to be multiple things that cascade into the result that we get. So and I do believe when it's all said and done, I think that's what we're going to see here is that there were multiple things that went wrong or weren't done, which led to this, right? Um, if I was a betting man, I would say that's where I would put my bet is that there were multiple failures along the way, which caused this disaster. Um,
And let's also not just give in fact too. For those of you who don't know where, who've never flown international, Washington National, I've flown into a dozen times for conferences. In fact, when I was commuting to and from work from DC, that was my home airport that I flew out of every time I worked out of DC because I didn't want to go to Dulles because that was another hour to my
yeah,
commute.
yeah,
Um, but it is a three runway intersecting runway airport. Um, and it's probably one of the busiest only because by virtue of its proximity is just literally across the river from DC
right.
itself. So a lot of people like to go in there and then, by virtue of just being in proximity next to Crystal City, Arlington, it's a favorite. Even I love it and I love flying into it too as well.
And to
But
mention, it's very easy to get in and out of that airport.
oh, yes.
When you consider Dulles, if you haven't flown into Dulles, anyone out there listening, I mean, that is not an easy excursion.
Unless you're in that side of town. Like I've flown into Dulles too for stuff, and it's better to fly into Dulles than it was to fly
Right,
into
right,
American.
right. But I think just from the easeability of getting in and out, even just security and all that, getting to the gates, National's a great airport, for
Yeah.
the area. It's just super easy. So this is definitely concerning for a lot of people,
Yeah.
because that is a favorite airport for sure.
Yeah. So, by virtue of being in actually a very congested airport because so many people want to use it. I mean, American Airlines is a great example. They use DCA as a giant hub for them. That's a big focus city and hub operations for them there.
Right.
So, they're packing a lot of flights into that a very small space. I would even argue it's probably even more congested than San Diego as an airport.
I
Uh,
agree.
but by virtue of having intersecting runways, your ability to do operations is very, very, very coordinated and has to be very done very, very well.
It's got to be coordinated.
And you have to have some of the best people trained. In fact, actually, most people don't realize it. You might be a freshly minted air traffic controller out of FAA school, but you're not thrown into one of the most busiest airports automatically. You are progressively stepped up to that point, and so it takes time. So if anyone that says otherwise, that there are inexperienced people running air traffic controller, like our current president, citing false reasons.
DEI.
I will say very much that they don't know what they're talking about, and they're just trying to deflect the issue rather than classic buck stops here.
Yeah, I mean any major international airport is, if you're a new ATC controller, you're not controlling anything. You're going to be watching. You're going to be an apprentice, and low flight times, low air traffic is most likely when you're going to be out there actually controlling stuff. And when we consider too that airspace around DCA, like you have air coming in, you have international air coming in, right, from all over the world. Then you have the military flights involved there as well. Then you also have private jets flying in and out. You have a lot of air traffic coming in there. So I think any one of those ATC controllers is going to have to be extremely seasoned and well versed in all the complexities of that airspace. So, it's not a role that I would assume the FAA would put someone newly minted out of air traffic control school in there. And to that point too is a lot of air traffic controller guys who get into that field. A lot of them are coming from either the military or smaller regional airports and kind of graduating into that space. So you're already seeing people who are coming into that space with a lot of years of experience already under their belt. So, I think to kind of boil this down is to, oh, well, it's like the new guy on the team. That's why it happened. I don't think that's accurate here by any stretch of the imagination. And I know there was an issue that was raised about staffing in the tower, that there should have been more staffing. I don't know all the ins and outs of that, but I would imagine that, if it was unsafe to man the tower because you were down on staffing, there would have been, and this also, what I'm going to say next, this also is not uncommon. This happens if an airport has an issue and they can't land aircraft safely. Rerouting is perfectly within the realm of what they do. I mean, you and I have both been rerouted multiple times. So this is not something that, is uncommon. If you have to reroute, you reroute because you can't staff the tower properly. So whoever's in charge understood that they likely had the proper staffing. I think the other point is, it's like I don't know how many flights went in and out of DCA that day. No other flights had any issues, right? They didn't have any issues with the airspace here until this event. And I get it. Like, one event is one too many. However, we have to consider that there were no other issues here. So we have to I think we have to take that into account of how many flights came in and out that day with no problems. How many helicopter flights occurred that day without any issues, right?
And I think it was also a disclosure. Those are Republic Airways flight. Yes, the day before, on the 28th, that had a near miss with a helicopter. It forced them to go around. I don't know all
Right.
the details. I need to go look at that, but something to keep in mind in that. Even me, by the way, I can say I've attested to a fact that a helicopter has crossed my path, landing at a uncontrolled airport.
Right.
I remember that it was September, no. So yeah, September, October 2022, I want to say. I had to go to, I think, Sioux City, Iowa, then go to South Dakota. But yeah, a helicopter took off in front of my RJ, and pilot caught it and did an immediate go around. Like, oh,
Yeah. It's important to understand that there is a lot of helicopter traffic,
yeah,
especially in major cities. And when you consider a major city like DC, or Northern Virginia in general, where there's multiple major cities kind of all pushed in, you're going to have congested airspace. It's just how it is. So it's a reality. If you're going to fly commercial air, it's a reality that there are going to be helicopters coming in and out of the airspace.
yeah. And this is Sioux City, by the way, too. So it's not a,
Right. It's
no,
it's not,
it's
not a big city.
yeah, it's not a very big place, and yet still we have you know, helicopter traffic. So, you know, keep in mind it happens anywhere there.
Right.
Something else I want to point out too. So if anyone looks on YouTube, the NTSB has been releasing media briefings. They're very factually oriented, very almost little to no speculation what's going on. And if there is a speculation, there's always that caveat there, which I love, by the way. Um, but media briefing three, this was the flight data recorder and cockpit voice reporter. They gave the summary on there. So if you guys want to take a look at it, please, I encourage you to. But here's some of the highlights I clipped from it as from what happened here. I encourage you guys to go look at that media briefing. You can hear the lead investigator talk about all the timelines and details. So I apologize in error right here. If there's any errors or omissions, this is what I summarized from it. So go back and check to make sure my facts are correct because I transcribed this as fast as I could. But all times Eastern here, 8:47 and 29 seconds. Uh, the CRJ 700, there is an audible call out, the automated call out saying it had reached 500 feet. At 8:47:39 p.m., there is an audible. Uh, there's audible. You can hear it on the in the cockpit. The radio transmission from Washington National Tower, asking the Blackhawk helicopter PAT-25 if they had the CRJ traffic in sight. Immediately, 1 second later, there is an automated traffic advisory coming from the CRJ stating traffic. 2 seconds later, again, you can hear in the cockpit voice recorder, Washington National Tower directs PAT-25 to pass behind the CRJ 700. At 8:47 and 58 seconds, um, there is an audible verbal reaction, and based on that, it probably was profanity, is my supposition. So I'm adding commentary there. I'm gonna put that for disclaimer commentary. But the official statement was that the CRJ there was an audible verbal reaction, and the flight data recorder data shows that the aircraft was beginning to increase its pitch, as in trying to go up or go around.
Yep.
It looks like. 1 second later, sounds of impact were audible, and then the recording ends. So my reaction based on that was the CRJ pilots knew basically 1 or 2 seconds before impact that a crash was imminent. And that was very, very, very hard to listen and hear.
Yep.
Um, very hard.
Absolutely. I mean, it's heartbreaking on so many levels, and then having to go back and hear the audio, and we obviously know we know the end result, right? So it's it's heartbreaking, right? When you put it all together, right? What what they may have been thinking and what was going through their head, and then obviously we know a few seconds later, that plane is gone and in the Potomac River. So very, very sobering and grim commentary, and I think unfortunately, I think a lot of us who do travel quite a bit, we are, we hear stuff like that, and it's it makes you reevaluate. Like, okay, um, do I need to get on this plane? Do I need to, like, is this travel necessary, right?
Yeah.
Uh, you know, so it's
Uh,
it's tough.
yeah. Um, I also want to point out this too. Is the response to as well. A lot of people have been focused on the accident and the investigation, but I want to take a moment to actually commend the response too as well. So, number one, air traffic control national. I want to say it was brilliant at the response process. You can hear them calling out the emergency. You can hear the first responders being briefed on it very quickly, like what's going on. You can hear where everything was going. You can hear that the they were told it was off of runway 33, so they knew it was underwater. So you hear all these small bits and pieces of information. Um, yes, there was some initial confusion. I'm no doubt about it that it's going to be communicated. They're looking at how to, improve the communication in there. But when an accident and all hell breaks loose, you're trying to get to the crash site. You're trying to figure out where the crash site is. You're trying to get there. Um, you can also see that, during the accident, Washington National intentionally also held all traffic too as well. The goal was to get first responders to the crash site as quickly as possible. I also want to point out for people who actually didn't know, the water temperature. When I looked at the initial data when I found the crash, it was reporting anywhere between 32 to 35 degrees Fahrenheit. It was later reported 33 degrees Fahrenheit around that area. That is 1 degrees more than freezing,
Yeah.
as in ice freezing. So they knew it, and you can hear the urgency, and they knew there was only a limited time for survival, so they were scrambling everything there.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think those first responders did as best as they could given the circumstances to try to save as many people as possible. And that is a worst case, one of the worst case situations you can deal with as a first responder is showing up to a scene. One, it's an air crash, which is already a very challenging situation, just given the fact that you're going to be dealing like what you have to deal with as a first responder in that situation is you're going to have people who, if they are alive, they're going to most likely be immobile, right? They're not going to be able to move because they likely have broken several bones due to the impact. So you're dealing with immobilized patients, which means you're going to help them move. You have to get them physically, get them out of that structure, vehicle, and help them move because you can't they can't physically move on their own. On top of that, you're looking at the fuel potential for fire if it's not already on fire, and then you're looking at the hazards involved with mangled metal and glass. I mean, this is just a,
and and environmental factors too. You're talking
right.
onset of hypothermia. You're racing
Right.
against people going into complete, or they're already in shock.
They're already in shock.
You're adding another set of shock on top of that. You're just, asking for just compounding trouble upon trouble. And so you're already rushing in
And
that
not,
situation.
and not to mention that they're in the middle of the Potomac River, right? So they've got to get craft out there um, to get these immobilized people through this debris and damage and those hazards onto a boat to get back to the ambulances, to hopefully keep them alive, right? And then
Yep.
you add in the hypothermic shock, you add in the fact that if they're dealing with any trauma, that body is just spiraling. It's spiraling badly. It is a tough situation to try to keep somebody alive under those conditions. And then big hats off to the first responders who went out there trying to do their best. I mean, they had to put on dry suits and get in that freezing cold water and attempt to do rescues of a submerged vehicle, which is just absolutely it's one of the toughest things you'll do. And then I'm going to add on top of that at night with limited visibility. I
Yep.
mean, you are talking just a extremely difficult job to do. And they did it. They went out there and tried to save as many as they could, with all the odds stacked against them. So, hats off to them.
Yep. And if I also might point out this too as well. Um, some of the reports that I read, at least from secondhand sources, so firsthand sources being their friends and everything like that, but some of the second sources because I'm secondhand on this one, was that some of the first responders, firefighters, were literally working through the night. So some of them did not go home until about 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. So you can imagine crash happened at 8:50. I'm just round up. They worked a full 8-hour shift, and with time running against the clock, you bet their butt that they probably didn't take meal breaks. They just went at it full adrenaline because they knew if they took the break, that might be the difference between
Yeah.
them rescuing someone or losing someone. So they worked 8 hours through the night, pitch black, cold freezing temperature, weather. And for those of you who forgot, we had that massive blizzard that went through DC recently. So it's not warm, it's actually quite cold.
Yeah.
So not really good there. Hats off also by to air traffic control around, so the various local approaches and centers too as well. The response was amazing. If you listen to the air traffic control tapes, you can look at the Vast Aviation YouTube channel. They have a bunch of those. You can see the various coordination trying to divert planes from Dulles to Baltimore and trying to get everyone sequenced up and everything like that. And then I think it was almost within 2 or 3 hours, maybe 4 hours, I think. American Airlines had a go team um, departing from Dallas and steaming straight ahead towards Washington, D.C. I think also the subsidiary also from Dayton, Ohio also had a
Right.
go team scrambling ASAP too as well. So like you can see, and I'm bringing these up only, not because to highlight and commend their behavior or anything like that, but it's also rather these plans have been in place. They weren't making these plans up on the
Right.
fly.
Right. Yeah.
So the whole point is, from a security perspective, trying to bring it back to, the nature of our podcast here, is these plans have been tried and tested time and time again to the point where they know how to enact it. And they enact it with, with looks like such finesse and ease. And you can see everything from the press briefings that MWA gave. You can see the response. Everything was very controlled and organized. And you can also hear in the language, they're trying to be positive, but at the same time, they're also trying not to be overly optimistic.
Yeah, they're being
So,
realistic. They're being realistic about conditions and the nature of the crash. I mean, and unfortunately, that's you have to be that way. There's families out there who are holding out hope that there may be survivors, but I think a lot of us who've been in the security space and understood the conditions knew that that was it I think it would have been nothing short of a miracle if somebody was able to survive that.
yeah, Air Florida Flight 90 was actually what came to mind when I heard crash. Um, Crash and Washington National. That was the first thing that came to my mind. Like, oh no, did it hit another bridge? Anyways, it's almost the end of our recording. It's a bit of a
Yep.
short episode this week, folks, only because we decided to focus on this. The investigation, the response, the lessons learned. I hope everyone who's having to deal with a security event or security incident, takes into account the fact it's important to have those plans. It's important to be prepared. And it's important to do the root cause analysis and not just look at a factor, but turn over, as many stones as you can. And granted, I understand, the NTSB is charged with getting down to the bottom of every crash, no expense spared. But, it's not possible in the private sector always. But my encouragement is to turn over as many stones as you can to making sure you understand, root cause as fast as you can to do
Yeah.
this and practice those response plans too as well.
Yeah, I think that's the big takeaway that I'd like to highlight is that um, you know this is a reality of having employees is that unfortunately um, it's going to happen. One of your employees is going to have a tragedy occur, whether it's just a medical issue where potentially they're traveling and they have a medical issue and it unfortunately results in them becoming deceased, or potentially something like this where two aircraft collide and now you have a situation where almost 70 people are having to be notified, families having to be notified that there's a death. I mean, I think the takeaway here is do you have a procedure in place in the event a tragedy like this occurs? And then there's all the other aspects to this, right? Of and I hate to take the focus off the victims here and the families who died. I don't want to seem insensitive, but from a security perspective, like we have to look at it as they all had phones, they had laptops, right? There's proprietary information that's now in the bottom of the Potomac River. What's your plan for that? how are you going to deactivate those systems? How are you going to safeguard the company, as well as, with compassion, um, inform the family that one of them, somebody is passed away. And then there's a whole nother aspect of this, which is more remains transfer, which I worked that problem quite a bit at a previous position where, you've got an employee or you've got a worker or you're part of an organization and a member of the organization, you got to get the body back to the family, right? There's a whole procedure in that in itself. And so I think, um, it's like if the first time you're doing this or practicing this is when it actually occurred, it is not a good, it's not a good look, because there's so many emotions involved with this situation. And I'm not, both of us are very passionate, emotional about this, and we're not even directly impacted, right? So you can imagine having to do that death notification, all the HR stuff that's involved with that, with the AD&D, with the accidental death and dismemberment documentation with HR, and then a life insurance policy, informing the family, and then trying to, getting the body back, getting the remains transported back to the family so they can do a proper burial and funeral. There is a whole procedure, a whole list of things that have to get done with that. And if you're not prepared for it, it can quickly overwhelm you. So just things to consider, as I think most of us have workforces that are either remote or travel quite a bit. And this is unfortunately is a reality that we all can face.
Yeah. All right. So that's it for this week, folks. What could possibly go wrong? Apparently a lot.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So yeah, stay safe out there, guys and
Yeah.
gals. We want to see you at the next conference we're at. So
Yep. And by the way, for those of you who are listening, um, take the time to go hug a friend or a family member. Tell them that you love them, because life is short.
yep, life is definitely short. So
Okay. Take care, guys. We'll see you guys all next week.